Symbolic History 7, The Dark Ages.
Victime Pascali laude, in volem Christiani, agnus regnemi nobis, Christus in nocens patri, reconciliati.
To call the birth phase of Western culture the Dark Ages, those Gregorian centuries from the fall of Rome to the sequences of 1000 and after, this Victime Pascali, is to invoke a mystery like the cloud of the tabernacle from which God speaks. Since the arts of vision, here St. Luke in ecstasy, German, about 950, attain heights of mandala. In such a blaze, where is the dark? Does it lie within or beyond those staring eyes? Certainly beyond, on the world abandoned, the earthly fabric of space, time, and causality. But the reduction of the physical has its inner concomitant, the mortification of humanity, so tied to space, time, and cause. Stranger than the eyes stare is that their God-centered inwardness, as in the Spanish 920 angel sign of Luke, may wear the deformity of being crossed. Whereas in the Gothic Reims, about 1250, mystical love has entered our realm and smiles. Thus in Dante, it is the sinner who twists his eyes, biechi, and falls into the mud of hell, while revelation comes as Beatrice, dolce amor, che di riso t'amante, sweet love, mantled in smiling. Though there's a source of confusion here, something hard to clarify, since Greco-Roman Christianity had favored a gentle kind of nirvana smile. It is just that change from valedictory lightning to the Gothic surge of energy and delight, which the centuries of invasion, the stripping off of outward things, and the fierce charging of spirit had to accomplish, to transform, by paradox, a motion of withdrawal into a dynamic of attack, where this 4th century Christ, even as he enters Jerusalem, seems soothed into a Neoplatonic, almost Buddhist child teacher and immortal guide. But that proud and terrible agonist would not be tamed, and the smiling Gothic grace is coterminous with a twisted Gothic pain, Leonin and Chartres, 12th century, both of which, mediated by the Dark Ages, have become bearers of incalculable force. So the darkness is doubly creative. Its arts of vision attest the birth of a culture. If that darkness were not windowed, it would preclude our study. By the monastic continuation of art and learning, we enter a gestation which, with other civilizations, was obscure. So in this Northumbrian 700 copy of an Italian 6th century manuscript, showing Ezra, by the resonance of symbol, such a monk in such a study, himself copying the temple records. Here history presents us with the first luminous dark age, the only documented time of troubles. Let us consider it in three aspects: its oneness, its multiplicity, its directional transformation. When seen in the larger sequence, from the temporal and humanist command of Greece and Rome, the Delphic hymn with Perseus and Andromeda from Pompeii, through the 710 Gospel of Echternach, also Northumbrian, where everything spatial and human flattens to the hieratic, as in Gregorian reduced to the tread of parallel organum.
Nos qui vivimus benedicimus Dominum, ex hoc nunc et usque in saeculum.
And so to the grandiloquence and whelming drama of the Baroque, Asum, 1721. In such a context, the whole span from the fall of Rome to the 11th century rise of Europe seems a concave of primitive withdrawal between two vast waves of civilized, assertive force. Let Virgil supply the classical cognate when Aeneas sees the fall of Troy already depicted at Carthage. Here is Priam. Even here worth has regard, and there are tears for things, and human hearts touched by the chances of mortality. Sunt hic etiam sua praemia laudi, sunt lacrimae rerum, et mentem mortalia tangunt. Or the line for which Augustine epitomized the tempting pathos and glory of pagan art, the farewell of Creusa's ghost, in felix simulacrum atque ipsius umbra Creusae. Set it against the first hymn, Cadman, about 670, is said to have sung, dream-inspired. The shades Augustine loved and feared have been shed from the soul. Nu is själen herian helfen rikes weard, methodus mista and his mod gethonk. Now let us praise the Prince of Heaven, might of the Maker, manifold of plan, work of the Father, all the wonders he wrought, the Lord everlasting when he laid out the world. For the Baroque, music will voice it more richly. A phrase from Bach's, "A mighty fortress is our God." This victory spills over in earthly pomp and power, whereas in Gregorian chant the entire phenomenal world dissolves in self-effacement at the dilating spaceless center of the one melodic line. O flying world, that we, sick-hearted, love thee. The body of Celtic chant is lost. Poor music, says Leonardo, which dies in the moment of its birth. Solemn performance assimilates even the media vita, probably of Carolingian and Gallic origin, to the suavity of Roman practice, a thing Charlemagne could never quite school his monks to. So our parallel has taken us from the Celtic flatness of Echternach to the Roman Christian revivals of the palace school. Though for all its softness of robe and shadowed mood, this evangelist is no less timeless, spaceless, selfless. In the Dark Age invariance of earthly fall and total faith, it rears a polarity of technique, the Greco-Roman lingering against the exactly contemporary, about 800 Book of Kells linear abstraction, in which the Celtic and even Germanic conspires with the Syrian and Armenian East. To call such labyrinthine sophistication primitive is strange, yet both soul and the world soul inhabits share here in a primitive reduction to a crisscross of saintly miracle and Mabinogian wonder. To see the Dark Ages as a mystical and ascetic trough between the breaking crests of Greco-Rome and the West is to emphasize its oneness of Augustinian shadow and Christian affirmation, while to juxtapose the meditative humanism of 800 Aix-la-Chapelle against the Irish calligraphs is to see that trough as a manifold over which run random sallies of intersecting waves, a hint at the bottomless complexity of tribal wanderings and successor kingdoms, local arts and classical revivals, a variety, however, stretched in the same polar field, as if these were all translations in contrasting languages, copies in different hands, but of a single sacred text, while above that ascetic one and fluctuating many points the historical arrow, such a pregnancy of change that a single image, here an Irish 7th century bronze, opens under the sacrifice of civilized nuance, that passionate identification voiced again and again in Celtic and Germanic poetry. Thus the Anglo-Saxon lament of Satan, sometimes attributed to Cadmon. O might of the Maker, mirth dream of God, that my hands hereafter may not reach heaven, my eyes never again be raised to that upland, nor my ears hear forever and forever the hallowed bright peal of angel clarions. Eala drichtenes trim, eala dream godes, that ik mit handum na maag he often garekan, na mit eagum na motup blokjan, na huro mit earum na shell efra geheran, thera birchtesten beman stefne. As in any living complex, we cannot exhibit the constant, but as it shows alteration. What dominates Christendom from Constantine at least to Otto III is the lion-bodied paradox of faith, with the world abandonment that so appalled Hegel. But the highest purity of soul defiled by the most horrible barbarity, the truth of which a knowledge has been acquired, degraded to a mere tool by falsehood and self-seeking, that which is most irrational, coarse, and vile, established and strengthened by the religious sentiment, this is the most disgusting and revolting spectacle that was ever witnessed, and which only philosophy can comprehend, and so justify. One could answer Hegel as the devil did Faust. Willst fliegen und bist vom Schwindel nicht sicher? You want to fly and get dizzy? Since when spirit withdraws, as he says, into itself, it waives the cost. Hegel's enlightened wish is for the Christ kernel without the hard shell. But without that shell, how could it have seeded itself over the Dark Ages, converting even by combat? Hegel will not see that what depressed him in Byzantine Christianity, a millennial series of uninterrupted crimes, was the other face of Yeats' artifice of eternity, of that self-scourging piety of anchorites in the desert of the Thebaid. And perhaps a saintly cognate for the schismatic Constantius would be Simeon the Stylite, anchored to his column, the rope rotting his flesh, he replacing the maggots as they fell from the sores. Eat what God has given you. Yet from that pillar, preaching sacred politics to hordes of followers in a church where ascetic soul was power. Indeed, that mask of religious force is treasured and revived from Constantine to the Ottos and beyond. Eusebius' miraculous history of Constantine's conquest by the salutary sign of the cross remains the model for Fulcher of Chartres' Chronicle of the First Crusade, end of the 11th century, as in this Otto III, the old arrogant humility proclaims Christ militant. Yet something has changed. The willed conversion of late Rome has become the automatic condition of the North. The impersonal flattening is complete. Dimensionality itself is allegorical. Another sequence of descent leads from the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, and no doubt from Byzantine chant, if against the flux of oral tradition we had something stronger than this Brompton oratory attempt at the 8th century golden canon. Across Europe and 300 years to the chapel of Charlemagne in Aachen or Aix, with the parallel organizing on octave, 5th or 4th.
Nos qui vivimus benedicimus Dominum, ex hoc nunc et usque in saeculum.
Here too what is continued reverts to the primitive, yet that dark and heavy narrowing bears the potential thrust of Gothic, a beginning where Hagia Sophia, like its age, is terminal, however strange the word may seem of what in so many ways begets the West. The shift to accentual rhythms in Byzantine poetry, in chant, we are told, to passionate imploration over a bass drone, in building to the enormous buttressing of vaulted stress. All springs from classical foreclosure, like the Code of Justinian, that final consolidation of Roman law, but with the hardening caste rigor, each worker frozen in his father's trade. In that vitiated empire, defended by barbarian troops, the emperor's drunken soldiery, torn by dogmatic schisms, as Gregory of Nyssa says, you ask the price of bread and learn the son is inferior to the father. You inquire of the bath and are told the son was made of nothing. This church rose from the ashes of the Nika revolt, the slaughter of 30,000 spectators in the Hippodrome, and after a comparable sacrifice of beasts, Justinian stood under the dome. Glory to God, who has deemed me worthy. O Solomon, I have surpassed thee. 20 years later, its structure of prophetic transcendence fell and had to be rebuilt, but lighter, more windowed.
Nos qui vivimus benedicimus Dominum, ex hoc nunc et usque in saeculum.
Against it, Charlemagne's harsh little chapel in the German forest, bound in on itself, assumes the vertical cast of what it moves toward, the jeweled dark enclosures of Romanesque and Gothic. Charlemagne's empire hardly outlived him, and the century that follows is in a way the darkest of all. But by 950, revival is underway, in Byzantium as in the West. In Byzantium, preserved sanctuary of the past, soon to be thrown down by the Crusaders, schooled in its arts, no mutation of force has occurred. The most peerless ivories, this Christ, compared by some with Phidian marbles, in impersonal, gentle glory, dream their early Christian life away. Where the Gerocroits of the 10th century Rhine, from a Roman colony, Cologne, torn to pieces and savagely rebuilt, like Charlemagne's chapel, is precursive, with a drive strengthened now by 150 years. Of the 5 centuries of turmoil and near stagnation, such works against the Roman Christian and Byzantine make us say with the shepherd in the Winter's Tale, even of this dead Christ, thou mettest with things dying, I with things new-born. The heresies of the early church tend to Neoplatonic, shocked withdrawal from the crucified body of the God-man. As in the discovered Gnostic Gospels, it was another who drank the gall and vinegar, but I was rejoicing in the height. So Justinian died in a Byzantine heterodoxy to remove the divine informal frontality, that the body of Christ was incorruptible, had never experienced the wants and limits of flesh. But the heresies of the West go the other way, toward a personal self-merger with God as man. In this, the Gero-Christ has crossed the watershed, as of the Alps, into European immediacy, where the torment and ecstasy of God and his kingdom are read over into the I, the here, and the now, toward the image that lies at the heart of that incarnate dynamic, Dührer's self as the man of sorrows, 1522, the crucifixion of Gero is already aimed. Back now, having sketched the field, to the art appearance of the Gallic tribes, end of the 3rd century BC, the heads from Entremont, just past the limits of Greece and Rome. The techniques already learned have sunk into the unrelenting rigors of barbarian spirit, sullen with potentiality. Against these future-haunted beasts, ranked at the ramparts pale, how undercut by self-questioning the civilized Hellenistic face, here Ptolemy I of Alexandria, about 290 BC, which gazed northward from age-old refinements toward that stirring in the forests. By the 1st century it was Rome. The frontiers were pushed back, but what the watchers at the stretched limes were looking into must have seemed a fabled garden, frescoes from the Villa Livia, and what they were waiting for was surely a sign of weakness in the ordered realms, where in fact the whole orchard empire was rife with soul sickness, already flowing over 2nd century AD into a valedictory Christian denial of the world, striking the affinity of longing between this hollow ripeness of late Egypt, Greece, and Rome, and the primitive, implacable, but no less yawning question of the pagan north. Here a Belgic cremation bucket detail, 1st century BC, subject to the dark enigmas of weird. By the 3rd century, when the Gauls and Rhine Germans express the softening of empire, their mausoleum portraits, here from Trier, share exactly in the heavy-eyed hunger of the Roman-Egyptian encaustics 2,000 miles away. Bede, in his most famous passage of the year 627, voices that sombre clue to conversion. The missionary, Paulinus, has told the Northumbrian thanes of the faith, and an old man compares life to a sparrow's flight through the mead hall in winter. It is the emptiness centuries of art had recorded. He flies in at one door and out at another, stays a moment in the warmth of the fire, and vanishes into the rain and dark from which he came. So the life of man, but of what was before, or of what comes after, we know nothing. If this new teaching can tell us anything more certain, it ought to be followed. Could this Gallo-Roman Stoic of Neumagen have said more? Or the nearby Porta Nigra, guarding Trier? The sombrest face of gloom could hardly convey more of the burden of carrying Rome to the Germans than this gate, to be taken so soon and in turn by Vandals, Huns, and Franks. So the question is academic, whether a successor offshoot of the classical might have emerged in Gaul. Certain carvings, like this family scene of the deceased, also from Neumagen, tempt us toward Gandharan parallels, though the question, no doubt, becomes one already raised. Could Christianity have been tamed to a gentle continuance of its earthly endowed and classical phase? Since religion is central to a culture, that the Hellenistic, which in the West had to fall into the earth and die, could in the East be grafted directly to a living stem, as in this genius from Hada, 3rd to 5th century, must have depended on the millennial growth of Buddhism from the even older Vedic ground. In Roman Gaul, the Celts promised most. This head from Auxerre, La Mélancolie, seems almost to have found a way of succession to the Greek. but barbarian wanderings, which in India were prehistoric, now flooded the whole Western world. In 406, the Vandals struck through Gaul. The Visigoths at the same time moved through Italy toward the sack of Rome. It is not just its small size that gives the seal of their Arian Christian leader Alaric its Dark Age stare. Jerome's lament from his hermitage in Bethlehem, "My tongue cleaves to the roof of my mouth, and sobs choke my utterance, when I think that the city that led captive the world is now led captive," might have served for the Western Empire. The Gallo-Roman arts were ploughed under. Though most of what has been dug up damps our speculation of a living transplant from the Greek. Compare one of the dancing girls of Arlon in Belgium with an Indian tree goddess of the same time, 3rd century. The Greek influence here has come through Iran, there through Rome, but in both the classical Aphrodite has been sexualized. The mound of Venus, like the Yorkshire Rock of Ages, where Preacher Toplady would write his hymn, is cleft. But in Mathura, the erotic nude has become a divine being, joyful, fresh, keen. That the dancing girls of Arlon have female parts does not make them less colonial and drab, heavy-hearted, pre-Protestant whores. The West is our center, but in touch with the world. So it must be noted again that during our dark age of ascetic severity, India went on blossoming century after century in a sacred culture of sensuous humanity and personal grace. What made D.H. Lawrence say of the 6th and 7th century Ajanta frescoes? Pure fulfillment. Botticelli is vulgar beside them. I love them beyond everything pictorial. Perfect, intimate relation between the men and women. And though Indian music has an improvised bearing on any past, traditional ragas refine modalities ultimately and hauntingly Greek, to hymn the sanctities of love and life.